Hi, and welcome to Heart-Centered Success. I'm your host, Diane Haworth, and today we're going to be discussing a very important topic, something that affects us all. The topic for today is honoring grief. Now, I thought a lot about how I wanted to present this, and instead of our usual panel discussion, I have one of my really best buddies here. Welcome, Bridget Bishop. Hi, Bridge. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Diane. I'm really happy to be here.
Bridget and I have a lot in common. We've known each other almost 25 years. We used to work together, actually. We're both sisters, daughters, aunts, grandmothers, ex-wives. We're both current coaches, and we have throughout our lives both gone through many incarnations of grief. Would you say that's right?
I'd say that.
And actually, in a personal conversation, we were discussing some of the things that had happened to us, almost the way, not only the way we honor our grief, but how we've evolved through those processes. So today we're inviting you into our conversation about grief, how it has affected us, our families, what we've learned from it, and we want to share that with you. Before we begin, I do want to say, if you are suffering from prolonged grief, from depression, from anything like that, we absolutely urge you to get professional help. We are coaches, we have other training, neither of us are mental health professionals. So if that is something you feel you need to do, we urge you to do that. So having said that, let's talk about grief. And I think the first thing we want to do, Bridget, is talk about what is grief. To me, it's loss of almost any kind. What do you think about that?
I think you're absolutely right. When I think of grief, Diane, I do think of tremendous loss. It can be loss from anything that you're attached to, anything that you have a history with, and of course it's a human being. Also describes grief.
But it doesn't have to be a human being. I was thinking, you know, we know people who have had deep love, affection for pets. There's also situations where people lose their homes. They lose jobs.
Yes.
You're a retired nurse. You've helped people through grieving for loss of a body part after a horrible accident. I think that we usually think of it as a person, and that's probably our earliest memory of grief, but it really encompasses a lot. I love what you said about something we're attached to. Speak a little bit more about that attachment piece that makes grief such a personal experience.
Well, I think with the attachment says to me that it's something that means something to you. It's something of value to you. It's something that you love. It's something that you've grown accustomed to. So that's where grieving for not only a loved one, but a former job, like you said, being in the hospital, if you've ever had any body part amputated, anything along those lines, there's something that was a part of you that no longer is. And there's a profound grief that goes with that. And it's just a longing for something that used to be that no longer is.
Yeah. It's almost, I think of it as a loss of opportunity. So, for example, as we mentioned, we're both ex-wives. And for me, when that marriage was over, there was not only a grief of the partnership, but there was a feeling of loss of what I thought would be, right? We would see our grandchildren grow up together. We'd go to graduations together. So it was that expectation that I was grieving.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And I think to your point, it's the future that you grieve. It's the traditions, the Christmases, the Thanksgiving, birthdays, weekends, vacations. All of those we had to give up for something else.
Exactly.
And so you grieve what you had in your mind for years and years, because we were both married for several years. So you have to say goodbye to that. And yet, with every goodbye, there's also something right around the corner that can be even better and more enlightening for you. So I think that's one thing that you and I had in common, is definitely grieving the future.
And the opportunity. So for example, I have a client, we both are coaches, we both have clients. I have a client that had what I call a perceived loss. So we have been talking about a real loss. Someone passed, there was a divorce, right? This person was grieving because she was afraid she was going to lose a job. She never actually lost the job, but went through the same kind of physical symptoms as somebody that was really in the middle of a real loss. What was interesting to me was her symptoms were the same. Her emotional, physical, it was the same from a real or perceived loss, because even though we have physical symptoms, it starts in your emotions, doesn't it? Yeah, it just starts in your emotions.
Starts with a thought.
I also think it was really interesting when I thought about the way because we've known each other for 25 years, we know our histories and things like that. We've had personal losses. We both lost our parents, for example. So it's a very personal loss. We've had what I'm thinking would be an associated loss. So recently, you were in the process of losing a very dear friend who I didn't know, but I felt associated with that grief because I was watching you go through it.
Right.
Or we've had children or family members that have had a loss that affected us. So there's that associated loss. But I thought, what about a community loss? Somebody in our family lives in Wilmington, North Carolina. That community was decimated from a hurricane. People are grieving real physical loss, right? People passed away from that horrible thing. But there's also communities that will never be the same.
That's right.
So the community is grieving. Isn't that, that's really kind of amazing. I was thinking when Princess Diana died.
Oh, yes.
I sat there and cried. I never met the woman.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Mother Teresa. The world can grieve like we did at 9/11. It's personal,
collective
associated, and then that collective grief is really something, isn't it?
And it's powerful.
It's really powerful. I'm curious, what do you think about this? I'm not trained in grief counseling. I'm just looking back at what I've experienced, what I've seen my family experience, my clients experience, and the reading that I've done, the coach training I've done on it. What I found is that sometimes people who have bottled up grief from other situations, for whatever reason, there'll be a trigger that might be this community grief or this worldwide grief, and they will all of a sudden, all this emotion comes out. Have you found that? And you must have in nursing, I know.
Yeah. And I think that's probably all part of the human condition too. Yeah, I've definitely felt that.
It's kind of an amazing thing. I think the first time I realized it was my current husband. We've been together many, many years. And throughout our marriage, both my parents have passed, his sisters passed. We've had a lot of death in our family. And some of it was natural, some of it, suicide, murder, not natural, very traumatic deaths. And I think because of the way he was raised, I never saw him cry until his cat died. And then it was, yes, he was grieving for this beloved pet, but I think that all of this grief that he had bottled up, because he's the man and he's going to be the strong one, it just was a way to release some of those emotions.
That's right.
Have you seen that in your family or in, certainly in work?
Oh, definitely in work.
Yeah.
But I think that whole situation, talking about your husband, with seeing that emotion after the loss of a loved pet, I think there is a lot to us bottling things in. And I don't even know if it's so much bottling it in as it is, our society tends to give us a statute of limitations on our grief almost.
You got a time,
Right?
yeah, you have a timeline.
Right,
You have a
almost.
timeline.
And there's a period where you talk about it and where it's out in the open.
Right.
And then after the formalities of funerals and so on, then it's less and less that we tend to talk about it. And I think for the person who's grieving, the one thing that you really want to hear is about the life of the person that they just lost. Not the death of the person that they just lost, but the life of the person. And there's nothing more beautiful than sharing that with someone who's in the process of grieving.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we had talked earlier that I had lost my oldest and dearest friend, and this is raw for me right now. And it was, you know, we had known each other for 58 years. Her name was Lisa McGowan. Beautiful, beautiful human being. And we grew up 3 doors down from each other. So we had our entire childhood together. We ended up both going on to college and then moving down from New York to the DC area. Mm-hmm. And then we went on for our masters, we got married, you know, that kind of thing. But we shared every single significant emotional event together. Mm-hmm. And there's something really powerful about that. When you've done that with a person, where you can be your authentic self, where you can be weak, where you can just say what's on your mind without fear of them thinking, you know, or something of you or judging
no
you.
Judgment.
You know, there's like a no judgment zone, right? So this beautiful human being, Lisa, she not only impacted my life, she impacted her family's life. She impacted her neighborhood. She impacted her friends and her work colleagues. And I can tell you at her funeral, they had a memorial service for her. And I always knew my friend was a big deal, but I didn't realize what a big deal she really was in this world. You know, she had traveled to 65 different countries, and she impacted women and stood up for women all over the world. All over the world. It was just amazing, the things that she did. So during this time where she found out that she had stage 4 lung cancer, she was diagnosed 2 years ago. And there's a lot that happens when you get a diagnosis like that.
So young.
So young.
Yeah.
And then a lot that happens in a friendship where you just want to do anything for that person. And then that person wants to do everything for you. And they don't want to leave you. And they don't want to leave their loved ones. And they want to do everything possible to be here. And that's exactly what she did. And she made the best of every single day. And I'm just honored to have known her. I'm blessed. But what I found through this whole time was I had 2 years to start the grieving process, just like her husband and her son and her sisters and her brother and their spouses and families and her work colleagues. We had 2 years. So it's a very private time, and it's a time that you evaluate what's going on in your own life. Yeah. But it's also a time that you recognize what's really important, what really means something. And the love of another human being that loves you right down to your soul is so beautiful. So I wanted to honor my grief when she finally passed away. I gave myself a few days just to stay home by myself and I just cried. You know, I thought, wow, I didn't know I had this many tears, but I just let it happen. I just wanted to feel it. And then I almost felt like I was in this cocoon of grief, a beautiful time. And through the morning, I saw the morning. And I started to come out of that cocoon and recognize I want to live for Lisa. I want to be changed because of her. I want to make a difference in other people's lives because of her. So to me, that's honoring grief, and it's recognizing the sadness, but it's also recognizing the incredible beauty, the incredible strength, the incredible life that someone else led that I was a part of. And I'll forever be thankful and blessed because of that.
Because I was in contact with you during that period, from my perspective, it was really interesting to see how dedicated, how passionate, how much you wanted to celebrate what you had, meaning what time you had, what your friendship was, all of that sort of thing. To me, that is a, I don't want to judge healthy, unhealthy, again, I'm not trained in that, but from an observer, I thought, you know, wow, there's somebody that understands the clock is ticking, and they're going to make the most of what they have with what they've been given.
That's right.
So it was really interesting to see the celebration element of that.
Yes.
Certainly not that you celebrated the passing of your friend, but you celebrated her life.
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
And my
I continue to do so.
Yes.
We just had lunch, and it was dedicated to you, Lisa.
Yes.
That's exactly right.
And my saying during that time was, it's a good day for a good day.
Yes.
And, you know, every day that I was with her was a good day for a good day.
Yeah. As uplifting as that experience was for you, not that it was not traumatic, it was really interesting. You said we had 2 years to say goodbye. Not all opportunities for grief are like that.
That's right.
Yeah, I know with my dad it was a 2-year process at the end, so I could say everything. We could make sure we did what we needed to do. Although, and I mean what we needed to do, legally everything was set up, you know, just everything we needed to do to not only take care of him, but make sure legally all the hospitalization, everything was done. What I have since realized since then, I wouldn't wish that on anybody, but it is a really different grieving experience than the sudden phone call. That is a completely different thing. You are looking at a situation, you know the clock's ticking. There are ways that you can prepare as much as you can, as much as I thought I was prepared. Losing that last parent, it's one of those things like childbirth. Until you've been there,
that's right.
You can read the books, but you don't know how you're going to respond. From a grieving perspective, for me, it was a lot of stress. There got to a point where I was able to be much more present in the moment with him. But I have to say, at first I resisted because I didn't accept the diagnosis. I was like, no, this isn't right, until it was obvious, no, this is what was going to go on. But when you get that sudden phone call and your world is forever changed.
Yeah, that happened with my dad.
Yeah.
I remember that. And I got a phone call I was working at the hospital at the time, and I always went to lunch at noon, and for some reason I stayed back and did some work, and my mom called me, and I was like, Mom, are you okay? And she said, you know, your dad passed away at 1:30 this afternoon, and people came from offices all around. I guess I must have just had this visceral reaction, and wow, that was something.
Yeah, totally unexpected.
Totally
Your dad was pretty young, right?
Yeah, 69.
Yeah, young, especially for where we're sitting now.
Yes, yes, very young.
But totally unexpected. From a physical perspective, and you are a medical person, I'm not, what I noticed when there was an anticipated grief, pre-grief I call it, there was more like a slow burn of stress for me. When I got my phone call that somebody that we know and love had committed suicide, it literally, I now understand what that belly punch feels like. I literally couldn't breathe. I couldn't talk coherently. Luckily, my husband was literally sitting right there. I had to hand him the phone. I just couldn't.
Your brain had to catch up.
And there was such a deep pain in my heart. My chest felt like an elephant was on it. Now, even when my dad died, there's physical pain. At least that's what I've experienced, physical pain. This was such a sharp, quick, unexpected pain.
Right,
Is that what you experienced as well? Yeah.
And I remember with my dad in particular that I just kept thinking, I didn't get to say goodbye. And I had just seen him the night before, so, you know, technically I did say goodbye.
Right, bye, Daddy.
Yeah, and, you know, we celebrated his birthday. And, or, no, wait, it was my daughter's birthday. So we were over at their house and had a wonderful time, so that was great. So that's what really startled me, was I didn't get to say goodbye. And my daughters at the time were like 2 and 3 years old, and I picked them up from daycare, and then I was driving home, and my oldest daughter Maureen said, "Well, Mom, you seem so sad." And I was crying, you know, driving home. And I told her that, you know, well, Pop had passed away, and she said, I'll never forget it, Natalie Wood had died. And she said, "It's okay, Mom, he's in heaven with Natalie Wood."
Hopefully that's exactly what's happened.
Yeah, so out of the little child's mouth, you know. So that was awfully sweet. But, you know, it was unexpected, yeah. And I think those are always different, and your mind has to catch up with what's happening.
Reality.
Right?
That brings up a couple things, actually. With that unexpected, somebody just in our little community, suddenly, our age, passed away Christmas Eve. Sudden heart attack, just gone. And I had lunch a couple weeks later with one of my friends who was able to attend the service, and she said, "I didn't believe it. I literally thought he was going to jump up any time and go, haha, got you."
Right.
It was like surreal. That's what I remember, it just being surreal. It's like you're in a play, you know what you're supposed to do.
That's right.
But you're going to wake up and it'll be normal again. It's just never normal the same way, is it?
Right, right.
Yeah, it's never normal the same way. I think that was a situation we've talked off camera about, that anticipation. Your dad wasn't there to watch your girls graduate.
Right, right. Or my daughter get married. Yeah.
Our parents aren't there with our grandchildren.
Right, right.
Yeah,
and that's big.
It's big, and you think, you know, it's like, oh, well, at your age, you know, you should expect that. I don't care how old you are. I really don't.
They're still your parents.
Yeah, and it's just like, Mom, what do I do about this?
Right. How
do I be a grandmother? I thought you were going to be around to teach me that.
Right, right.
And even though that's expected, because they're our parents, right? Boy, when there is that unexpected young person death, wow, wow. You're grieving for the young life that has been lost. You're grieving for their family, your family. It is that grieving the future that will never be that way, isn't it? You brought up your children being young when your dad died. I'm just curious, when you were growing up, you grew up in a big family, big, beautiful family. Did you all talk about death? I mean, did you go to funerals? How were you prepared for death?
Right. It's kind of interesting because I was thinking about my very first introduction to it.
Yep.
And it actually happened to be my next door neighbor's grandmother who had passed away.
Did you know her?
Yes.
Okay.
And so I went to the funeral, and that was my very first funeral.
And how old were you?
And I was probably, I'm guessing 3rd grade maybe.
Okay, so little, 9, 10.
Little. And then when I was in 5th grade, I had a little best friend, and her name was Whitney. And she was this precious, precious little girl with blonde, straight hair, big blue eyes. She was very, very thin. She had a humpback. She had several medical issues. And I can remember being in school, and she was sitting behind me, and I went to a Catholic grammar school, and I turned around, and we were talking and everything else, and she went home for lunch that day, and she never came back.
Oh, wow.
And little Whitney had passed away. So my second time experiencing a funeral was at her wake, and I remember she was in a beautiful white casket, and I just thought she was sleeping, and I was 5th grade. And so I learned young
Did your parents talk about death? I mean,
yeah,
they did. It was discussed.
They did. It
your parents went to funerals?
Yeah,
Okay.
and it wasn't one of those where where anyone in my family did not want to go to a funeral. I think they always felt that it's a really good experience to go, to support the family,
Right.
for your own closure. It can be a very positive thing. But that was my early experience.
Yeah, mine did not go that way. Mine did not go that way.
How did yours go?
My parents were death adverse, if
Really?
that's a thing. My mom had lost her mom at 9. I am convinced she never processed that grief.
Okay.
My dad had been a little 18-year-old in the trenches of Germany in World War II. He had spent time in a Nazi concentration camp. He had been one of the young GIs that helped liberate one of the Jewish internment camps. I have no idea what he saw, but I know that grief has never processed. So we did not talk about death. My parents did not go to funerals. If they could do anything in the world to get out of it, they did not go. And I have to say, we lived physically removed from most of our relatives. So if our third cousin died in Nebraska, we probably didn't even know about it till a letter came anyway.
Okay.
But my first experience with death was, you remember the little turtles we used to get? Do you remember little turtles?
Yes,
Yeah, little
yes,
plastic tubs.
yes.
Do you remember that? Used to be able to buy these
yeah,
little
little
turtles.
tree.
Had a little tree,
tree.
and it had in the middle of this plastic bowl.
Yes.
There was a little island.
Yes.
Well, we had a turtle. We named him Gilligan, and that was Gilligan's Island. And of course, they kept dying. So we would have a little funeral in the backyard. Then we would go to the store and get another Gilligan. They looked just the same.
Yeah, yeah.
So in my little brain, it was like, well, you just go get one that looks just like it, and there you go.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
was, and my parents they did not talk about that. They did. It just was not. Jews didn't do that.
Yeah.
So even if I would ask, no, we don't need to talk about that now. So I don't think that certainly helped me. When I was older, and my children were little older than what you described yours to be, my husband at the time, their dad's grandfather passed. And I remember thinking, I won't be able to answer their questions maybe when it's my mom and dad. I want to prepare them. I want them to understand the ritual, the richness of the experience. Even though they're young, at least they won't be afraid. I grew up being afraid, and I wanted them to be able to ask questions. So it wasn't like we hung out at the funeral home or anything, but if there was a death that I was going to go to the funeral, and if it was appropriate time-wise and all that, I would say, do you want to go? That turned out to be a really healthy thing for them. They've gone to way too many funerals, but at least they weren't afraid of the process. And they had support. Now that's another thing. For me, there were certainly been times in my life that I did seek professional help to get through that.
Sure.
Boy, there wasn't, my parents didn't want to talk about things like that. I wanted an outside professional opinion to help me process.
Sure.
At one point, I had a wonderful pastor that helped me process when my childhood friend died, and we were like, we weren't even 40 yet. We weren't even 50, I'm sorry, we were in our 40s. But it was like, this is not the way life is supposed to go.
Right.
We're supposed to ride into the sunset together. Our kids are supposed to grow up together. I just really needed that.
Right.
Has anybody in your family, or do you have any? I know the minister, and I've had professional, emotional, mental health people that have helped me through that kind of thing. Is that anything that you've ever thought about or recommend to your clients if they if you feel they need it? Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes having that outside opinion, it's not even an opinion, someone to hold you in your grief.
That's right. That's right. And it's
Hold you in your
kind of
grief.
a third party that's not in it,
Not affected,
you
right?
know, and they're kind of on the outside looking in. And I think that's really, really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In-
Absolutely.
In the hospital setting, you all see an awful lot of sad, tragic circumstances. As a professional, as a medical professional, how do you deal with helping someone in that in the moment grief?
Right.
Like grandma's dead.
Right.
How do you do
Right.
that?
And I've had to do that, and I've also been a hospice nurse, so you know, I'm very comfortable with being there for people, with holding that sacred space for them, because it's not what I have to say. It's being there to hold them if they need to be held. It's being there to sit down with them and just listen, or just allow them to cry, complete silence, but holding that sacred space so that they can have that emotion and be able to express it, because it's really important. It's a vital thing that we all need to do. But at the same time I'm saying that, we all grieve differently.
Absolutely.
Every single one of us. And I know probably with your experience with your mom and dad, my experience with my mom and dad, I have 6 brothers and sisters. We all grieved very, very differently. Very differently. Just like husbands and wives who get a divorce. They all grieve differently for the loss of that relationship. So there is no one size fits all. I just want people to know that it's always personal. It's not a group activity. If someone cries and that's how they get through it, that's great. Some people don't, you know, and it's all up to that particular individual. So to your point though, how you're there, I think it's just holding them physically, emotionally, spiritually, just holding that space for them is so important. And once you do that, that's the greatest gift of love that you can give to any other human being, because that's where we're most vulnerable.
We've talked outside of the studio, of course, of how that thread of love is what really gets you through. In the professional environments, like you talked about, I love the idea that you recognized it was a sacred space. It also has to be a safe space. One of the things that was really so helpful to us when my mom actually passed in a hospital, that there was a very loving professional that we actually happened to know, that not only was there to help us emotionally, but we had questions about, well, what happens now? Like, we didn't know.
Right, and you don't know.
We didn't know.
You don't know.
We don't. How can we stay here for a while? What do we do? Just listening. I guess that goes for 2 places, doesn't it? If you're the one in grief, the best you can try to listen so that you understand what you need to ask for, because that's one thing everybody will say, what can I do for you?
Right.
I remember thinking, I don't know.
Right.
I just can't even,
Because you can't.
I can't even think
process
right
it.
now.
Yeah. We couldn't even make a cup of coffee.
Yeah. Which is great that people bring you food, because
That's right.
you can't,
That's right.
you just don't know what to do.
Yeah. My sister Tara, the youngest in our family, her dear friend, she has a dear friend, Lisa, and Lisa's mom came to the door and she rang the doorbell, and I looked at my mom like, I wonder who that is. So we answer the door, and here her mother has these 2 bags filled with delicious food, and it was light finger food that
Just
didn't
pick it
have to
up.
be cooked. It didn't need any tender loving care. You could just put it on the table, and because what I found was, you know, emotionally, you're not even hungry, and you don't even feel thirsty almost, and you've got to keep drinking and, you know, getting some water and eating something. So the mere fact that she did that was so beautiful, because I think if she didn't, I don't know if any of us would have had the foresight to say, oh, we got to make sandwiches or a little something for us, right? So that taught me an awful lot. It taught me an awful lot. And I know to go with little things of food now. So through all of these different experiences, I can meet people where they are just because I've been there and I know what worked for me. Right?
I always take sleepy time tea, some kind of tea to help people sleep, some kind of, there's just, we're both women of faith, and you can just sit and say, what do they need?
Right.
What do they need?
Right.
And I do have to say, that may be our thing, it's not everybody's thing.
Oh, and it isn't.
A lot of people can't do that.
Right.
They just can't for whatever reason. That's not wrong. If somebody's having an issue like that and you can't go to the house, that's
okay.
not wrong.
That's okay.
Because you have to honor your feelings as well, right? I know that with some of my friends, though, I did this just the other day. My friend that died when we were, it was our girl's, she's been dead almost 13, 14 years, maybe closer to 15 years. I was going through some things. I found a little handwritten note she had passed me under the table in 8th grade class, right? That I put in an envelope and sent to her daughter. Just, you know, I have things like this from your mom. It makes me smile. I wanted to share this with you.
Right.
Like even all these years later.
Yes.
I do that.
Absolutely.
Because they're never gone from your heart. And even though that sounds hokey, they really never are. Every Christmas, the kids are like, oh no, Mom's going to decorate the tree. Because I bring out, you know, here's an ornament that my Aunt Marge made me. She's passed. I was like, this is Aunt Marge's ornament. Like, oh no, here comes the Debbie ornaments. Here, we made this. And even though when they were little, they thought it was sad, it is such a celebration of remember what we did.
That's right.
It really is. And it's not grief at that point.
Right.
I think that's another thing I want to talk about for a while. I absolutely agree. Everybody grieves differently. There's no timetable. It's not, you've had a week, let's get over it. That's not the way it works. I do think, as a non-professional, there is a difference between honoring your grief, feeling your grief, moving through your grief, and being stuck in grief. And I think that stuck place is, again, there's no necessarily time frame on that, but that's another, if you feel like you're stuck, that's the time you can seek
professional help.
Yeah, because I was thinking on the drive in today about what my time frames were, right? My mom died the end of August, and that was just earlier in August. My favorite aunt had died, Mom died, my kid's godmother and their great-grandmother all died within 2 months.
Wow.
So it was just like you get up and you just think something and you get punched again. I tried, and I literally cannot remember from August to about January. I guess I went to work. I know I do remember missing a couple payments because I just forgot to do my bills. But I couldn't tell you what my kids did in school. I don't.
Right.
I just can't remember.
Right. Right.
I was in that fog.
Right.
Trying to process. I don't think that's necessarily unusual, do you? Yeah.
No.
But trying to sit with that, getting support.
Support is important.
Support is really important, and support in not only, you have to have a lot of support.
A lot of support. And I know even with Lisa's husband, Matt, and Eli, you know, that husband of hers did everything for Lisa. I mean, it was the most loving thing I think I've ever seen. I mean, you know, from getting her medications to making sure she had good, delicious meals, to making sure she was comfortable, that she was warm, that the nurses were coming, you know. he took her to doctor's appointments. It was beautiful.
And it's
but
a huge
at the
drop.
same time,
Yeah.
it is emotionally and physically, it's very, very draining, right? So you're putting out all of this love for this person that you absolutely adore. And at the same time, you've got to take care of yourself so that you have the energy and the strength to take care of a loved one. So what I was telling him was Lisa had a whole network of beautiful friends, neighbors, friends from growing up, friends from Waterville, Maine, friends from all the 65 different countries. You know, she just had a collection of what I called her beautiful net of people who supported her, right? But for Matt and Eli, they needed help too. So I said to Matt one day, you know, if someone offers to make you a meal, say yes. Say yes. You know, just allow people to do something for you, you know, because sometimes you don't want to rob them of their blessings. They want to do something. And even if it's a meal, it's a beautiful way for them to show how much they loved his wife, for them to show how much they loved him and their son, and, you know, in any circumstance. So gracefully saying thank you and accepting someone's ability to do that is very beautiful. It's a beautiful thing.
I think that's a great point. And
You know.
in that particular situation, the other thing that happens, I know this is what happened when my dad was ill. You're running on adrenaline.
Oh, yes.
And you have no idea how long you're going to be running on empty.
You don't know.
So we know people it's
Yes.
been 10 years,
Yes.
more.
Yes.
To be loving to others, you have to be loving for yourself. And certainly in the beginning, you get a call, you got to run to a hospital. Yes. You're going to sacrifice, you're going to do whatever you need to do to manage a situation. But that love has to be for you as well, for you to really be able to adequately not only grieve, but to help everybody else in situations where our family members are grieving.
That's right.
When my dad died, I had to be mindful of how does this affect my kids.
Absolutely.
Actually, my dad was my husband's best friend.
And look at the loss there.
So
Right.
he's watching his wife suffer. He's watching the kids suffer. He's grieving his best friend.
That's right.
So
That's right.
some people do need private time, like you said. First few days, I just need to be by myself, and I say honor that as well. But if you're in a cave
sometimes you
for
wanna
3 or
be with
4
people.
years, maybe you want to look at that.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's true.
And there are grief support groups.
Oh, there are. And I know my mom, she had lung cancer, and she survived that. And then when she had gotten sick, she was sick for 6 weeks. So from beginning to end, she died at the 6-week mark. And she was living with my sister Tara and my brother-in-law Rudy. And I'll never forget it. Tara was like, we all need a job.
Yeah.
We all need a job. So Rudy's job was to cook. And he made the most delicious meals for my mom. And then at the same time, my sister Nora had breast cancer. So we were going through the chemo and the radiation with that. So like you said, you're running on all of this adrenaline. My sister and I were still working full-time jobs and
With
taking
kids.
off, and kids, and all of this. So there's just a lot to it. And I think it takes a village.
It does.
Not only to raise someone, but also to help when someone's sick.
Yeah.
And to allow others to help you. If there's anything that I can say to people, it's if you can, allow someone else to step in to help you.
Yeah.
Because you need to rest, and you need to rejuvenate, and you need to get yourself prepared for what's lying ahead. And we never know what that is.
That's right.
right.
And help if they ask, you can make specific requests. I, for years and years, was one of the deacons at church, right? And we had our flock. We would take care
Right.
of our flock.
That's right.
So when one of my flock was sick, then I knew how to cook, so I would coordinate meals to go with them, right? But there were certain people that would mow lawns. I know that one lady said, well, I don't want to ask anybody, but gosh, I wish somebody would run a vacuum.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, you can ask somebody, and if they can't because of bad back or whatever, then
Right.
that's okay.
Right. Right.
And it's also okay if you don't want help. Just really,
Right.
where is that coming from? Is it that
Right.
you really need the time alone, or are you afraid you're going to impose on someone? If they're asking, make the request.
Right.
But not everybody's able to do that. The other thing that I've noticed, and I'm curious what you think about this, especially in the case of cancer. I had lunch with a friend recently who has a family member that has been diagnosed, and it's very serious. And of course I said, how can I help? I have this resource, and what can I do? And what this person said to me is, oh, we're just overwhelmed. We're just overwhelmed. So I chose to just respect whatever course they wanted to take. Some people will take traditional medical route. Some people won't. That person's the only one that can decide what's right for them.
That's right.
So
That's
I
right.
think some people will have grief because if they had just listened to me, if they had done things that way, oh, that's a rough row to hoe.
Yeah. Right.
That's a rough row to hoe.
Right. And the other thing I wanted to say, though, is, you know, when a loved one has passed away,
Yep.
we are in a state of overwhelm.
Yep.
We're in a state of just overwhelming sadness. And we don't always say the things that we wished we could say. Like, some things will come out wrong, or we'll say something and regret it later and think, why did I say that? So one of the things that I'm very cognizant about now is that loved ones may say something during this time of grief. Don't put a lot of stock in it, because, you know, I know when my mom passed away and my brother Kevin and I were cleaning, you know, her house, and talk about traumatic, right?
Yeah.
And so in the middle of it, we got into an argument, which we haven't argued like in years, probably since we were this big,
Decades.
right? Decades. And just out of sheer sadness and overwhelming grief, we did. And all of a sudden at the end, we just started laughing because we thought, that was ridiculous.
It wasn't about
but
that.
it was never about that. And then, you know, we just ended up hugging and, you know, crying, and, you know, it was just like, wow, I have no idea. You know, that just came from left field. But just kind of expect that we're human beings, and it hits all of us a little bit differently.
When my daughter lost someone very, very close to her, very tragic situation, my ex-mother-in-law said to me, you know, what are we going to do? And I remember telling her, we're going to love her through it, whatever that meant. And I think that while it's easier and harder, but it's something that's more expected if it's in your family. You know, there's people in the community, there's people that you work with, there's people that are in your civic club that may not be as forthcoming about a death or a loss or some kind of grieving process they're going through. And sometimes they'll snap. So to just be aware that no matter what comes out of somebody's mouth, just to understand there may be things that they're going through. People grieve about all kinds of things. All kinds of things.
Right.
I'm not even being funny about this. After elections, people grieve.
Oh, yes.
And after the Super Bowl, people
Yes.
grieve.
Yes.
They grieve. Who are we to decide who grieves over what, right? It's just a normal process. I would urge everyone to get the resources, the people they need around them, to grieve as healthy as possible. And what is healthy? To me, it means honoring that grief, moving through it. Now, I know that you have always been a real active person. Talk for a minute about exercise and physical movement. Did that help you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because it helps with depression.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. And there's just something almost magical about it where I don't know if it's getting the endorphins engaged
brain
or
chemistry,
what
yeah.
exactly is going on, but it definitely helps. And I know even with Lisa, I would just find myself just walking and walking and walking and walking. And that helped me.
Because you were doing something.
Because I was doing something, I had the sun on my face, it was fresh air, it was, you know, a beautiful sky. I was thanking God for everything around me.
Yeah.
And in that moment, it was a good day for a good day.
What other kinds of things? We've talked about getting professional help when we needed it, having support, rather that is a community support group, a grief support group, which it's my understanding there are many specialized groups, so widows, widower groups, people who've lost children. There's even a grandparents lost group. So that would be great. Certainly exercise, movement as appropriate. What other kinds of things? I know for me, that would be the time when I would tend to not eat as cleanly. And man, that just, I don't know about you, but it just made me feel worse. And you know, I don't know how many giant chocolate cakes you can eat when someone
Yes.
brings it over.
Yes, that's
but
right.
you don't have to eat it all, do you?
That's
Those
right.
stuff freezes.
Right,
That
yes.
stuff freezes.
Yes.
What other kinds of things? Being
Besides
in
Ben
nature.
and Jerry. Yeah, because
Yeah.
those two friends we have, right?
That is kind of sacred.
Yeah, it is.
Little
We
bit.
gotta, you know, you gotta have that. But truly, besides that, I do believe in nature too. I also believe in connecting with your friends and just talking it through, and understanding that since grief is such a personal thing, sometimes we want to talk to people and sometimes we want to be left alone. And it's knowing where that person is in that journey of when to step in and when to step back. That's a judgment call that your loved ones will, you know, know when they're surrounding you. But yeah, it's a difficult thing to go through.
I have known folks, and I know in our own family it worked this way, and I know you do this actually as well. Some people will be fueled by the desire to celebrate that person.
Yes.
We both have a friend that actually started Mothers Against Drunk Driving because of the loss of her own son.
That's right. That's right.
I know people in my family have changed directions on businesses. Tell people about Dooley Day.
Yes. Well, my mom's name was Dooley, and when she passed away, I can tell you that the world grieved for my mom. Just a beautiful, beautiful woman who gave so much, and she volunteered all the time, and her heart was just so big. And so for the anniversary, the first anniversary of her death, I think that's very significant for all of us, right?
Yep.
And so I wanted to celebrate her life, and I wanted her to know. There's a author that's unknown, and he said, the greatest gift you can give to someone who's left you is to live fully in their place. And I had that put on a t-shirt, and we have, you know, Dooley Day every single year, and we don't have it on the anniversary of her death. We have it on the anniversary of her birth. And that was strategic for us, and we wanted to make sure that on that day we had acts of kindness and just acts of mercy for other people. So all throughout the United States on Dooley Day, I have people that do everything from you know, work at homeless shelters. A friend of mine in California goes to a suicide hotline and volunteers. I have people who volunteer at the what is it with the animals?
SPCA.
I can never say that. I don't know what it is with me, but the SPCA. Yes,
The animal place, yeah.
The animal place.
Yeah.
I had people who would write checks to their favorite nonprofits. My nephews and nieces did things in New York where at St. Joseph's they collected all kinds of canned goods. My niece in Georgia, Shannon, such a beautiful human being, she also has breast cancer. And during her treatment for Dooley Day, she went out with her 2 children and they got these Ziploc bags and they made these little kits to go so that if they're ever at a red light and someone needs money or something like that, all she has to do is reach over and it's got a toothbrush in it, toothpaste, it's got like a card for McDonald's, it's got somebody to wash up, hand lotion, you know, just that kind of thing. And oh my gosh. And then another Dooley Day, she went to the police station and she made cookies for all the officers, and her children wrote them handwritten notes to thank them for their service. And, you know, just the Dooley Day phenomenon just keeps getting bigger and brighter and more beautiful every year. And to me, what greater way to honor my mom than to do that?
Selfless acts, volunteering, remembering lovingly the kinds of things she did.
That's right. That's
a beautiful way to use that energy that we could go to a bar and cry because we miss somebody. And there are days that's good too. But to say, well, wait a second, what could we do to honor that? What can we do to have love in motion?
That's right. That's right.
I know that's one of your things, right?
It is.
Be just compassionate, loving, what can we do? I just love that idea. So channeling your emotions and creating something meaningful to you from that. It's another way to work through your grief. We're not in any way insinuating you need to get over your grief. How can we use that? What lessons can we learn from that? It was a beautiful story you told about Lisa, and I know when those situations have happened for me, as horrible as they seemed at the time, what gifts, right? Just like you said, when one door closes, as painful as that door is, there is space open in your life to do something else. And it doesn't mean that it's better, it's just different, because you're different. You're different.
That's right. There's no question about it. And I think we had talked offline too about the hole that never gets filled. But what happens is we learn to live around that hole and we build a life that honors that person in a beautiful way. And if we can all try to do that, how beautiful is that? What a gift we can give to our loved one. So that's what I want to do with honoring my loved ones, is always to keep them in mind and to do something for them.
And because I know you're honoring your path as you do that.
That's right.
So tell everyone, Bridget, how they can find out more about Dooley Day and your website. What would that be?
That's truerosecoaching.com.
Great. Thank you so much for being part of this intimate conversation between friends. I want to thank Bridget. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for listening. We are praying for you. We are meditating for you. We are sending you love and light wherever you are in your grief process. And I also want to take time to thank our wonderful producer, Tremaine Johnson, and our crew for helping us bring these kinds of topics to you here at Heart-Centered Success. Until next time, I'm Diane Haworth. Thanks.